Librarian versus Legend, Claire's epic Jiu-Jitsu showdown. In the gritty heart of Seattle's Iron Haven gym, Claire Thompson, a 33-year-old librarian, steps onto the jiu-jitsu mat, her glasses fogged, her heart pounding. Surrounded by hardened fighters who mock her soft frame and unassuming demeanor, she's an outsider in a world of sweat and steel. But Claire's no stranger to fighting. Years of surviving a broken home have forged a quiet resilience. Against the taunts of skeptics like Ethan and Riley, she trains with relentless determination, her body transforming, her mind sharpening. Each bruise is a badge, each defeat a lesson. Now at the gym's brutal Forge Fury tournament, Claire faces Lucas the Reaper Delgado, an undefeated titan who promises her swift defeat. The crowd jeers, bets stack against her, but Claire's eyes burn with focus. As Lucas charges, she ducks, weaving through his attacks with a precision no one expects. In a flash, she traps his arm, the gym falling silent. Will Claire, the unseen contender, topple a giant and rewrite her story? Or will the Reaper crush her dreams, proving the doubters right? The mat holds the answer, and the fight is just beginning. In the misty gloom of Seattle's industrial district, the Iron Haven gym stood like a fortress of grit and ambition, its brick walls pulsing with the raw energy of jiu-jitsu fighters. The air inside was heavy with the tang of sweat and liniment, the mats scarred from countless battles. On a rainy Tuesday evening, a diverse crowd gathered for the advanced jiu-jitsu class. Tattooed bouncers, tech bros chasing adrenaline, and grizzled martial artists with knuckles like walnuts. Among them was Claire Thompson, a 33-year-old librarian who looked as out of place as a sparrow in a wolf den. At 5'4", with a slight frame, wire-rimmed glasses, and a faded cardigan she hadn't thought to change out of, Claire drew skeptical glances from the moment she stepped onto the mat. Her auburn hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, and her nervous smile did little to mask the uncertainty in her hazel eyes. Claire hadn't come to Iron Haven on a whim. A flyer tacked to a community board at the public library where she worked had caught her eye, its bold letters promising strength, resilience, and confidence, qualities she desperately needed. Life had worn her down. A recent layoff from her part-time bookstore job, coupled with the lingering ache of a childhood spent dodging her father's temper, had left her feeling small and powerless. Jiu-jitsu, she thought, might be her chance to rewrite that story. But Iron Haven was no welcoming haven. The gym was a crucible, its regulars a tight-knit tribe who didn't suffer outsiders lightly. As Claire fumbled through the sign-in sheet, a wiry fighter named Ethan, his arms sleeved with tattoos, sized her up. "You lost, bookworm?" he said, his voice carrying a mocking edge. The others chuckled, their eyes glinting with amusement. The skepticism wasn't just casual banter. It ran deep. Jiu-jitsu was a brutal art, demanding not just physical strength, but a mental toughness that Claire, with her soft hands and hesitant posture, didn't seem to possess. The head coach, Marcus Kane, a former collegiate wrestler with a jaw like granite and a stare that could freeze blood, gave her a curt nod when she introduced herself. "This ain't a book club, Thompson," he said, his tone half warning, half challenge. "You sure you're up for this?" Claire nodded, her throat tight, but the doubt in his eyes mirrored the room's. Her first class was a disaster. She tripped during warm-ups, her glasses fogging as she struggled through burpees. Grappling drills were worse. She flailed against opponents who pinned her with ease, their movements fluid where hers were clumsy. One fighter, a sharp-tongued woman named Riley, took her down in seconds, smirking as she locked in a choke. "Maybe try Pilates," Riley quipped, her words slicing through the gym's din. Claire's cheeks burned, but she said nothing, her hands trembling as she adjusted her gi. Iron Haven's culture was unforgiving, a Darwinian proving ground where weakness was exposed and exploited. Claire was an easy target. Her lack of athletic experience made every drill a struggle. Her arms buckled during push-ups, her footwork was a mess, and her gi hung awkwardly on her frame. Even Coach Kane, who'd trained his share of underdogs, seemed unconvinced she'd last. During one session, he paired her with a hulking fighter named Jamal, who outweighed her by at least 90 pounds. "Let's see what you're made of," Kane said, his arms crossed. Jamal took her down with a single sweep, the mat slamming into her back. As she gasped for air, Ethan's voice cut through from the sidelines. "She's gonna quit by Friday." The The words hit harder than the fall, but Claire wasn't new to being underestimated. She'd spent her childhood navigating a chaotic home, learning to survive by keeping her head down and her will intact. This gym, she told herself, was just another storm to weather. Outside the gym, Claire's life offered no reprieve. She worked long hours at the library, shelving books and helping patrons while her savings dwindled. At night, she'd collapse onto her thrift store couch, her body aching from training, her mind replaying each humiliating moment, the snickers, the eye rolls, the weight of everyone's disbelief. Her only solace was her journal, where she scribbled her fears and hopes, the pages filling with resolve. She wasn't here to impress Ethan or Riley or even Coach Kane. She was here for herself, to prove she could be more than the world expected. That stubborn spark kept her coming back. She started arriving early, practicing basic stances in the gym's shadowed corner, her reflection flickering in a cracked mirror. She ignored the whispers that followed her, the bets on how soon she'd bail. Each bruise was a mark of defiance, each failure a step toward something greater. Claire's determination wasn't flashy, but it was relentless. She'd faced worse than a room full of skeptics, years of scraping by, of being told she wasn't enough. As she lay awake at night, the gym's taunts echoing in her mind, she thought of her younger self, the girl who'd learned to duck and weave through life's punches. Iron Haven was no different. She wasn't fighting for their respect, she was fighting for her own. By the end of her first month, she was still the outsider, still the underdog. But Claire Thompson was no quitter. She adjusted her glasses, tied her gi, and stepped back onto the mat, ready to face whatever came next. Claire Thompson's journey at Iron Haven Gym was a slow, brutal forging, each class a hammer strike against the raw material of her resolve. The Seattle rain beat against the gym's windows, a relentless drum roll that matched the rhythm of her pulse as she stepped onto the mat night after night. The air inside was thick with tension, the regulars, hardened fighters like Ethan and Riley, still casting skeptical glances her way. But Claire had learned to drown out their voices, focusing instead on the burn in her muscles, the puzzle of each technique, and the quiet fire that kept her coming back. She wasn't the librarian who didn't belong anymore. She was a fighter carving her place in a world that didn't want to make room. At 33, with no athletic background and a life that left little room for dreams, Claire treated Jiu-Jitsu like a lifeline, one she gripped with both hands despite the odds stacked against her. The gym was no kinder than it had been in those first humiliating weeks. Ethan still smirked when she fumbled a drill, and Riley's taunts, "Nice try, bookworm," cut like a blade. But Claire had stopped letting their words define her. She arrived early, her sneakers squeaking on the empty mats as she practiced footwork under the gym's flickering lights. At home, her tiny apartment became a makeshift dojo. She pushed aside her thrift store coffee table to drill sweeps, her shadow weaving through the cramped space. Late at night, when the city hummed with distant traffic, she pored over jiu-jitsu videos on a second-hand laptop, scribbling notes about arm bars and guard passes. Her body began to change. Her shoulders grew wiry, her core tightened, her hands steadied. She wasn't fast or flashy, but she was precise, her movements honed by hours of solitary practice. Coach Marcus Kane began to notice, though his acknowledgement was sparing. One evening, as the gym emptied out, he caught her drilling a triangle choke, sweat dripping onto the mat. "Still here, Thompson?" he asked, his voice gruff but curious. Claire nodded, her breath heavy, her glasses fogged. The next day, he started correcting her form with more focus, showing her how to shift her weight for leverage or angle her hips to lock in a submission. It wasn't praise, but it was something, a crack in the wall of doubt that surrounded her. Her peers were less impressed. During a sparring session, Riley caught her in a sloppy guard pass and tapped her out, rolling her eyes. "You're wasting your time," Riley said, loud enough for the room to hear. Claire's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Their doubt was fuel, and she was learning to burn it. The mental grind was as punishing as the physical. Jiu-Jitsu forced Claire to confront her deepest insecurities, her fear of failure, her nagging sense that she was too small, too weak, too ordinary. One night, after a brutal session where a cocky college kid named Leo took her down repeatedly, she sat in her beat-up hatchback, the rain streaking her windshield. Leo had grinned through every tap-out, treating her like a punching bag. The gym's laughter still echoed in her mind, sharp and relentless. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, and felt the old urge to quit. It would be easier to walk away, to sink back into the quiet life of shelving books and fading into the background. But then she thought of her childhood, of nights spent hiding from her father's rages, of learning to survive by sheer will. She'd fought to make a life for herself, clawing her way out of a broken home to become the first in her family to finish college. This gym was just another fight, and Claire wasn't done fighting. Progress came in waves, unpredictable and hard-won. Some days, she felt unstoppable, chaining moves with a precision that surprised even her. During one drill, she executed a perfect scissor sweep, sending a stunned Ethan to the mat. He laughed it off, but the flicker of surprise in his eyes stayed with her. Other days were humbling. Her body betrayed her under pressure, her mind second-guessing every move. But Claire showed up, every time. She started sparring with more aggression, no longer shrinking from bigger opponents. One evening, she caught Jamal, the hulking fighter who'd flattened her in her first weeks, off guard with a swift guard pull. She didn't finish the submission, but the fact that she'd rattled him was victory enough. The gym's dynamic began to shift, subtly but undeniably. A few fighters stopped mocking her, offering grunts of advice instead. Ethan even tossed her a water bottle after a tough round, a small gesture that felt like a truce. By her 7th month, Claire was no longer the clumsy newbie who'd stumbled into Iron Haven. Her technique was sharp, her movements economical. She'd learned to use her smaller frame to her advantage, slipping out of holds like water through fingers. Her mind was as quick as her body, anticipating attacks and countering with calculated precision. Coach Kane pushed her harder, pairing her with tougher opponents, fighters who didn't go easy, who tested her limits. Each match was a crucible, her body screaming, her lungs burning, but Claire refused to break. She was building something, a quiet strength, a confidence that rooted deeper with every class. The gym was still a battlefield, its air thick with judgment, but Claire was no longer prey. She was a contender, her resolve forged in sweat and defiance, ready for whatever challenge came next. The Iron Haven Gym was transformed on the night of its annual Forge Fury tournament, a gritty spectacle that drew fighters and spectators from across Seattle's underbelly. The air crackled with anticipation, the mats gleaming under harsh spotlights, the crowd a restless sea of locals, gym rats, and curious onlookers. The walls, scarred with years of sweat and struggle, seemed to pulse with the energy of the night. Claire Thompson, now a familiar figure after months of grueling training, stood ready in her worn black GI, her glasses taped at the temples, her auburn hair pulled tight. At 33, she was no longer the trembling librarian who'd stumbled into Iron Haven, but the crowd didn't see it. To them, she was still the underdog, a soft-spoken outsider facing an impossible foe, Lucas the Reaper Delgado, the gym's reigning champion. At 28, Lucas was a 6'1" wall of muscle, like his record a litany of submissions and knockouts, his smirk a promise of swift defeat. As Claire stepped onto the mat, the crowd's murmurs swelled, bets were placed, laughter rippled, and all eyes awaited her inevitable fall. Lucas strutted forward, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. His jive was crisp, his movements fluid with the confidence of a predator. "Let's make this quick, librarian," he taunted, his voice carrying over the crowd's buzz. Claire's heart pounded, a drumbeat against her ribs, but her face was a mask of calm. She'd spent months preparing for this moment, studying Lucas's fights on grainy YouTube clips, noting his reliance on brute strength and aggressive takedowns. She'd faced him once before in a sparring session, a humiliating rout that left her bruised and doubting herself. But that was months ago, before her body had hardened, before her mind had sharpened into a weapon. Coach Marcus Kane, standing at the mat's edge, gave her a nod, his first real sign of faith. "Show him what you've got, Thompson," he said, his voice low but steady. The crowd jeered, expecting a slaughter, but Claire adjusted her glasses and planted her feet, ready to rewrite the story. The match began with a blur of motion. Lucas charged, his hands clawing for a grip, aiming to slam Claire to the mat. She ducked, her smaller frame making her elusive, her reflexes honed by countless hours of drills. The crowd's laughter faltered as she slipped out of his grasp, dropping low to pull him into her guard. Lucas snorted, a deep, mocking sound that echoed through the gym. "You're kidding, right?" he said, trying to posture up, his weight pressing down like a boulder. But Claire stayed focused, her mind a steel trap. She'd learned to use her size to her advantage, turning opponents' strength against them. She waited, patient, as Lucas tried to overpower her, his breath hot and frustrated. Then, in a heartbeat, she saw her chance. A slight overextension, a moment of arrogance. She shifted her hips, trapping his right arm in a kimura. The crowd hushed, the air electric with disbelief. Lucas struggled, his face reddening, his muscles straining against her grip. Claire's legs clamped tight, her body a coiled spring. With a final, calculated wrench, she forced his tap. The gym erupted. Cheers collided with gasps, the crowd surging to its feet as disbelief gave way to awe. Lucas slumped to the mat, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with shock. He extended a hand, his smirk gone, replaced by a grudging nod. Claire stood, catching her breath, her glasses fogged but her gaze steady. The weight of her victory settled over her like a warm tide. She'd done the impossible, toppled the Reaper. Coach Kane clapped slowly, his rare grin breaking through the grizzled mask. Riley, who'd once called her a joke, stood frozen at the mat's edge, her arms crossed but her jaw slack. Ethan, the tattooed skeptic, let out a low whistle, his usual mockery silenced. The gym's hierarchy shifted in that moment, the air charged with a new respect. Claire wasn't just the quiet librarian anymore. She was a force, undeniable and fierce. Word of her win spread like wildfire through Iron Haven and beyond. Newer fighters, wide-eyed and eager, sought her out for advice, their voices tinged with admiration. Veterans, who'd once dismissed her, now nodded when she passed, their smirks replaced by something closer to respect. Even Riley, in a rare moment of humility, muttered, "Nice work," during a water break, her tone clipped but sincere. Claire didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The victory was hers, not for their approval, but for herself. Outside the gym, her life began to shift. She walked taller at the library, her voice firmer when dealing with difficult patrons. At home, she started teaching her neighbor's kid, a shy 12-year-old named Mia, basic self-defense moves, passing on the confidence she'd earned. Iron Haven, once a place of judgment and doubt, became her sanctuary, its mats a canvas where she'd painted her triumph. Claire's story became the gym's legend, the unassuming woman who'd taken down a giant, proving that strength isn't always loud or obvious. The victory wasn't just about the tap-out, it was about the months of bruises, the late nights studying, the stubborn will that refused to break. As she left the gym that night, the Seattle rain cool against her skin, Claire felt something new, a quiet certainty, a belief in herself that no one could shake. She'd faced the Reaper and won, not just on the mat, but in the deeper fight within. Iron Haven would never be the same, and neither would she.